Artificial intelligence promises a massive shift in society, culture, and the human experience. How will the church respond? To explore this topic in depth, we brought on two contributors to Encountering Artificial Intelligence, written in cooperation with the Holy See. Dr. Paul Scherz is the Our Lady of Guadalupe Professor of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Mariele Courtois is an Assistant Professor of Theology and the Director of the Center for Technology and Human Dignity at Benedictine College. Listen in as they discuss how the church can navigate this new technological landscape.
Benedictine College is transforming culture in America, one conversation at a time. From our studios in Atchison, Kansas, these are the Benedictine Dialogues.
Paul, it's so wonderful to have you here at Benedictine College, and today we're going to talk a bit about your important work in technology ethics and in AI. And one question that I'd like to start out with is, a lot of people take the approach that technology is simply a neutral tool, and the way that we use it will determine whether it's good or bad, whether it truly can be used within a Catholic ethical worldview. So what comments do you have about that view of technology simply as a neutral tool? Is that accurate? What would you have to say about that?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to campus. It's great to be here. Yeah, that's a great question. Technology as a neutral tool was the classical way to think of it. And for some technologies, like a hammer, you can really think of something that's kind of so inert as in that way. But there's a lot of other technologies which have a certain kind of worldview built into them. Pope Francis talks about this in Laudato Si and a lot of his more recent his later writings on AI and artificial intelligence. That really there's a worldview that's built into these technologies. These technologies have a tendency to be used in a certain way, and technologies are also formative. The most obvious example is social media, right? So these are great technologies that could be used in a lot of different ways, but they've been designed in a world in which what's called the attention economy rules. That the way that these companies stay in business is by having people spend as much time on the algorithms as possible, on their sites as possible. So the algorithms are designed to maximize user engagement, right? Because that's the worldview they're coming out of. It's a very kind of capitalist kind of let's extract as much attention as possible. Well, how do you extract attention? Well, you can do it by addicting people to a technology, so they spend all the time on the technology. You can do it by getting people really emotionally engaged. And unfortunately, one of the most emotionally engaging things is to be angry. So there's a way that these algorithms encourage like shocking things or push to the front things that will get people angry and into fights so that they spend more time on the sites. So it's not that you couldn't ever use social media in a good way, but it has a way that the society in which it's designed and the kinds of incentives and goals that society encouraged has created a certain way that it's going to be used. And that way that it's used shapes us, right? We are shaped to become addicted to this technology. We're shaped to start engaging in discourse in ways that are about these petty fights and polarizations. So that's why a lot of people now say, well, we can't think of technology just as neutral. It has these tendencies. Not that we can't overcome such tendencies, but it becomes very difficult. I mean, and it's not just modern computer technologies. If you go back to Plato and the Phaedrus, he talks about how writing and reading books will change education, in which you don't have to spend as much time memorizing text or having it as close to hand. You don't have to spend as much time like engaging with a teacher to understand something. It seems like you have like an objective text there that will give you all the information you need to know. So I mean, that one is much more neutral, where we can see, well, there's gains and there's losses, but it does shape our worldview. So you have to consider the moral implications of what will result from any technology that you start to implement.
Those are some really good examples of types of technologies that might have an intentionality built into them, that are part of a larger structure, that are character forming. And you had mentioned Laudato Si as an important resource for understanding this broader sense of technology as more than just a neutral tool. So what more would you have to say about what the technocratic paradigm entails?
Yeah, so this is something that Pope Francis has brought into the Catholic discourse, but it's really, he's drawing on a lot of older thinkers, both kind of secular philosophers like Martin Heidegger, but also Christian Catholic thinkers like Romano Guardini, in which he's talking about how in our present day, we've taken on a very utilitarian, reductionist mindset towards the world. How he describes it is we start to see everything as just material for use. We don't see the inherent purposes in nature, right? We just see it as something where we can extract goods to be used in industry. We don't regard other people as in the image of God, who need to be respected as people with dignity, but we see them as things we can use for our purposes, right? Whether that economic or in other for pleasure or for whatever we want to kind of use them for, right? So this way that he thinks infuses all of modern society, and it's especially problematic because it's become embedded in a lot of our technologies. And as we use the technologies, like with the social media example, we come more and more ingrained with this way of seeing the world.
And what are some ways that you think it may be possible to rescue technology from the technocratic paradigm, if that's possible?
Yeah, so this is a big challenge, and it's what a lot of research now is looking towards. How do we use this technologies in ways that can be good, right? So there are ways in which you can set guidelines on technology to make sure that it doesn't have its worst uses, worst kind of ways of deploying it, right? So a lot of people talk with AI, like ensuring that it's transparent, that it's unbiased, that it's not kind of taking advantage of people. But I think we have to look deeper at the technologies that we're designing and the reasons why we're designing the technology, what we're designing the technology for, right? So if you think of technologies in healthcare or AI in healthcare, are you designing technologies in a way that they support the good of healthcare, that they support the doctor-patient relationship, that they support the healing of patients? Or are you designing technologies that merely try to make money or just try to serve people's desires? Pope Francis talks about different ways of organizing technologies. So instead of having technologies dedicated to large enterprises, have things that are dedicated to small producers that are created in a way that's very subsidiary. He talks about making sure that technologies are serving real needs rather than merely kind of accumulation of money, right? Real needs, especially of the suffering, of the poor, of the vulnerable. And these are some of the kinds of ways that we can prevent technologies from creating the technocratic paradigm, determine what end are you serving with the technology, how are you designing it, and also how are the technologies going to be interacting with the user, right? Is this something that's going to addict them, right? Well, if it is, don't design it that way. Do it some other way.
And the approach that you're describing is really showcasing the responsibility that is on the user as well as the developer and the people that are incorporated into the culture, the practices in which the technology is being integrated. So there's a lot of responsibility across society to help us to use technologies well and to create technologies that are ordered to the common good.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the responsibility lies on who's developing it and especially who's implementing it, right? People who run organizations have to, what are we going to use in our school, in our hospital, in our charity? And think about what the choices they make very carefully. And I think the user, if it's a consumer technology, the user can choose, well, am I going to use it or how am I going to use it? Right, or not. But frequently people are stuck in situations in which they don't have that choice. Like if you're a student and your school has decided to use Canvas, you can't really say, well, I don't want to use Canvas or not. Or if it's using if you're in a hospital and you're being told to use a tool, you can't really fully opt out of it. So this is where I think a lot of it is how we design institutions and programs.
That's a very good point. And do you think that there are some examples of AI technologies that are well designed and seem to be ordered correctly to the common good?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question, because sometimes when we talk about technologies, I mean, I'm a moral theologian, so I'm always looking for problems. Where is the danger here? But I think we have to recognize that these technologies have great uses and are really can serve the common good. So, I mean, just logistics, the way that AI has transformed logistics, like airlines now depend on vast amounts of algorithms, computer systems to make sure planes arrive at the right place. A couple of weeks ago, we saw these web services companies come down, which really blocked a lot of the simple business transactions that really make our lives easier, help us to do a lot of things. So those are kind of, it runs a lot of the infrastructure and back office tasks of our daily life in ways that are tremendously beneficial. But even in other ways, it can help encourage human encounter. One example that I frequently use in medicine is that doctors are increasingly using what's called ambient AI or AI scribes. And so if you remember a couple of years back, or even perhaps your current appointment, frequently you would go into a doctor and they'd be spending all their time looking at the screen, right? Because they had to fill out the electronic medical record in the middle of an appointment. You know, doctors hated this, having to focus on this. Patients hated having the doctor not be able to like look at them while they're talking to them, right? So one of the popular uses of AI is this technology that will record the conversations that the doctors are having with the patients, transcribe that, and then use that to fill out the medical record, right? And, you know, there can be problems that can come even out of this, right? There's concerns over privacy, what is the data being used for, how accurate, these kinds of things. But in theory, this is a use in which AI can actually serve to increase human interaction and the doctor's ability to engage with the patient rather than kind of undermining it.
That's a wonderful example. And it's also interesting to think about how some of the good uses of AI can be overshadowed by the uses that people are more concerned about, and how those wrongful uses of AI can also be obstacles toward people to trust these good uses too. What do you think are some crucial concerns to have about AI when it is misused, or what are some examples of maybe some AI technologies that we already have that are a bit more ethically questionable?
So, I mean, there's the standard kind of concerns over AI that you see in something like the Rome call, right? Like it can be biased, right? Because it's using data that isn't representative of minorities or that looks at, that has injustice already built into it. It can be, used in ways which misdirect people. It can be used in ways in which people don't have kind of an appropriate ability to appeal a decision by the AI, if it makes a medical decision or insurance decision or something like that. These are all kind of broader concerns, but I think the two deeper concerns that I'm really troubled today is first, the rapid growth of relational AI and the ability to AI to mimic people. We're seeing this with people are developing even romantic attachments with these chatbots that are developing. People are creating AI avatars of their dead relatives. Some people are spending hours interacting with computer programs as if they were persons. I think this has some real dangers for drawing people away from interactions with others, for forming them to want to be with a program that is always responsive to them, right? And always trying to agree with them, which will make it harder for them to engage in real relationships that with others who are not always going to agree with you or are going to cause trouble at points. I think this is a special danger amongst the young, right? But you can see it in other areas as well. I mean, as we become more interacting with chatbots in call centers, in our service life, we're going to become we will have less space for encounter with others. And encounter is such an important aspect of what the Catholic ideal is that we should be a civilization of encounter, a civilization of love, of interpersonal engagement. The second thing that really concerns me is de-skilling, right? And so there's a lot of ways in which AI can help people and assist people, but there are also a lot of ways in which AI can make it so people lose skills that they once had. I mean, we're seeing this with writing in education, where a lot of people are in education or even in the business world or in the regular world of work are now using generative AI to generate all of their writing. Over time, they're either never going to learn how to write or they're going to lose those writing skills, which is a major issue because writing isn't only like something you do to generate text, right, and content. It helps you to learn how to think overall, right? And this it helps you to organize your thoughts, to make arguments, to become persuasive, to learn how to be persuasive to others. And as we lose that through society, that's going to really change how we can communicate. And there's other areas, any profession you can see as people rely more and more on a machine, they're going to start losing these skills, which will have a lot of knock-on effects.
That's, I think, a very important issue to hone in on, the fact that we can have a lot of skills that are disrupted when we outsource different practices to AI, but that AI could also potentially disrupt the habits that we need for human relationships when AI tries to mimic another person, tries to mimic being in relationship with us. I think that there's a lot of ways where our discussions in practical ethics really need to consider these problems, and that we also need to rely on a fundamental philosophical and theological worldview to help confront these questions too. One important resource for addressing some of these questions is the Encountering Artificial Intelligence book. You and I were a part of the Vatican Dicastery for Culture and Education's AI research group that worked on this. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of the approaches that were used in that project. What are some of the main takeaways that you think are important from that book for AI ethics?
So the project started about 5 or 6 years ago. The Vatican was really, at the end of the last decade, was really searching for ways of how do we engage AI. Pope Francis saw this was going to be an important, really revolutionary tool for our society that Catholic thought hadn't really dealt with. So a lot of different parts of the Vatican started moving forward with plans. So the Rome Call was one of the first, right? And that was a way in which the Pontifical Academy for Life interacted with different companies like Microsoft and IBM to come up with a set of principles that could be shared by everyone around AI. And these are great things like privacy and transparency and inclusivity, but they were at a more general level. What was then called the Pontifical Council for Culture was interested in was how do we go deep into what is Catholic anthropology, right? What is the Catholic vision of the person? The Catholic understanding of theology, what does it specifically have to say about AI? So it gathered a group of scholars together to have a big conference on this. And this conference was going to occur in March of 2020, and then the pandemic occurred. So we didn't get to meet in person and discuss these things. But what did come out of that was a series of Zoom meetings that we met every month. This group of about 24 of us, we divided into 2 groups, so it was more like 12, to discuss all of these issues that were arising and figure out what could we say about it as Catholic philosophers, Catholic theologians, Catholic scholars. And you remember those conversations. They were like wide-ranging on everything. And then in September of 2023, Bishop Paul Tai, who is helping to lead the project, the secretary for the dicastery, he said, "Okay, you guys have talked a lot. Why don't you come up with write something up, and we can have that." So that led to this process of over the course of about 9 months. 24 of us gathered together to write a book on on AI. And the main theme we used was this theme that was central to Francis's writings and teachings, which was this theme of encounter. This idea that really he uses the Good Samaritan to exemplify of human interaction as this really personal heart-to-heart kind of exposure to the other, an intersubjective relationship that's fundamental to how we should be as people and what we should be doing, right? And we thought about the ways in which AI could not engage in those, right? So one of the really interesting sections was talking about why we shouldn't think of artificial intelligence as a person. There's a lot of scholars out there who are very concerned about whether AI is actually conscious. A lot of our colleagues did a really nice job of laying out like why that is not a concern that Catholics should have, and we shouldn't think about AI as a person as it currently exists. But the part that we were more involved with and writing and kind of central to was the ethical side of this, where we looked at how can AI support kind of relationships of encounter and how can it undermine relationships of encounter. So I think it was great because we looked at a lot of different areas. We looked at education, we looked at work, we looked at cultural creation, and described how AI can be problematic in these areas, the different ways, because we really believe that you can't think of AI as just one thing. It's going to look different in every area that you engage, that it's deployed. And we came up with a set of solutions that you could deploy in these different areas to use it better, use it in ways that are more aligned with the Catholic vision of the person. Right. I mean, yeah, I don't know. What do you think are the major takeaways here?
It was such a wonderful project to work on, and I really enjoyed getting to write on anthropology as well as the applied ethics side. And some of the main takeaways that I think are really important, considering the underlying anthropology, is what do we mean by intelligence and what do we mean by the human intellect? And this is something that if we truly understand the intellect through a theological, anthropological framework as something that's able to weigh the values of the world, then it's very questionable that AI can actually do that. I think it's also really important to showcase how an embodied consciousness is very important for being in relationship with another person. And then beyond that there's so many important ways that we need to integrate a framework that thinks about grace and how we view the human person and how the human person does encounter the world. That grace is something that the human person is able to receive and fully rely on account of the fact that they are a person that AI simply can't do in the same way, though that we don't want to say that there's no grace at work at all in human creations. I also think that in the part of the book that looked at applied ethics, it was really wonderful that we structured it looking at different spheres, as you said. One of those spheres was the sphere of the family, looking at how AI ethics can interact with and provide a framework for engaging with the family, engaging with education, engaging with healthcare. Because like you said, the technocratic paradigm can very much impact ways that we are building habits to be in relationship with one another. And the family is the first home where we learn our ethical perspective, we learn these habits of how to engage with other people. So it's very important to prevent AI from interfering with those important relationships at an early stage. And with healthcare too, there are plenty of ways that AI can provide a lot of benefits to healthcare, but we also want to protect the encounter of the physician-patient relationship and make sure that human aspect is still preserved in the medical encounter too.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I think there's so many nuggets of wisdom that go through the book. I mean, so one of the things that we emphasized is that this was just a beginning of the conversation. There are just so many kind of small things. I go back and read the section on the family or read the section on medicine, and that I've developed into other kinds of, kind of taken that idea, which was there, but then developed it and explored it further. And I hope that others are using it as an inspiration, because collaborative projects can be difficult, but when you bring people together, you really get something that's far more than any one person could do. And I think it really has served as an inspiration for others. And I know it was something that was used in Antigua et Nova as they were thinking through that document that was released by the Dicastery for Culture and Education, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. Like, it's cited in there. So, I mean, that was also great to see that people are taking it and using it as a starting point and developing more from it.
And it's really wonderful to also showcase the consistency between the theological and philosophical framework of how we view the human person, how we describe the human person, and then how that directly applies to the ethics side of what we do and how we pursue the flourishing of humanity together in light of these new transformative technologies. The new book that the Dicastery for Culture and Education's AI research group is working on is Reclaiming Human Agency. Is going to look at some additional questions about how AI and other types of transformative technologies can affect human freedom, can bring up problems of how it's possible for technology to maybe nudge or control people to make certain decisions that they may not have made without the influence of this technology. Why do you think that discussion is so important right now?
It's important more broadly because human agency is fundamental to how we understand the Imago Dei. There's a lot of different aspects of the Imago Dei. There's relationality, there's our eternal destiny, but two that are very important is that our capacities for reason and free will, which the patristic scholars and Aquinas and many others have always seen as kind of fundamental to the image of God. But also our stewardship. We're called to steward, to till and keep the world, right? So we're called to actively engage the world and use our service in the world to others and the common good as ways to ultimately serve God. So being able to be an agent, to be free, to rationally act is incredibly important. But now we're at an age that people are talking about AI as being agents. So one of the big hot buzzwords are agentic AI. And when they mean that, what they actually mean is that it can do tasks, right? It can just carry out simple tasks. But one of the important things I think we point out is just solving tasks, solving problems isn't the full extent of human agency, which requires deliberation of what ends are we serving? Where are we directing our action? And also has a level of freedom and choice that it's not available to computer programs. So I think that's very important now that we're in a world where people are talking about agentic systems. The second is that a lot of the ways that, as you were saying, AI is being used is really kind of manipulative. A lot of the kind of algorithms that we're exposed to is trying to nudge us into buying something, nudging us into staying on a pathway, nudging us to vote a certain way, like trying to transform our beliefs. This also kind of traps us in addiction. There's misinformation that shapes our way of acting. And so there are a lot of ways in which AI could be deployed in order to constrain our freedom. And one of the things that I thought was especially interesting about this was some of the subtler ways that AI can kind of really harm agency. We have a section on what Pope Francis called rapidification, how a lot of what the promise of AI in some ways is we can do things faster and more efficiently. But we also reflect on sometimes it's not actually freeing to be faster. Right? Sometimes the demand to be fast can actually decrease our agency, our ability to act. We hear so much about the race surrounding AI. We're in the AI race between US and China, between different businesses trying to compete with one another. And a lot of people in these spheres feel they have no choice. They're forced into this race, right? So there's a way in which the speeding up of life, and even just in our daily lives, we can feel, okay, we need to respond to email faster. We need to do our work faster and faster and faster. And we're going to try to use AI to kind of do that faster. But the more we speed things up, the more other people are going to speed things up. So we never have a chance to have that moment for contemplation, to slow down and think and deliberate about what we're doing. So I thought it was very interesting. And we also have, again, suggestions for how to respond to these problems as well.
I think it's another really important point that comes out of that book is that the way that we think about knowledge and information gathering, what is it used for? And there's certainly a responsibility that especially technological developers need to consider of making sure that agents have the information that they need in order to do the activities that they need to do in light of their vocation. So to make sure that this type of knowledge is supported is really important. And then to withhold that or to try to speed up actions where it undercuts the person's ability to discern and to really think about all of the different options or the information that they need to make a decision, that's something that can be really damaging to a person pursuing the ethical actions that they should be doing in their particular place. I think that this book will hopefully be really helpful, especially to developers, to think about the ways that technology can impact choices, human discernment, and also just the way that people understand themselves as agents with free will and with a conscience.
That's right. It does have a lot of applications for developers. But I think also as well, we're rereading it now. We have the proofs that we just got, so I'm starting to read. But how at a more fundamental theological and philosophical level, these new implications of technology are really bringing to light aspects of human agency and important aspects of human practical reason about what human wisdom is that it's hard to see without the kind of threat from technology or the ability of technology. So I think in some ways it will have, hopefully, both this practical effect, but also help to develop our thinking on a virtue like prudence and how to shape it and encourage it in the present day.
And some other implications that the book speaks to as well is the connection of the human person to work, that it's important for human agency as well to maintain the presence of the person within their work and the special relationship that comes out of work or the products of art, for example, being a gift of that person to their community or to their families. But then also the benefits that come from engaging in work, that it's something that helps to form the person, to help to form their conscience, and to help them to find meaning in finding the way that they are contributing uniquely to the body of Christ, to fuller society. So being able to preserve that sense of agency within work is something that is very important, that I think the book contributes well to that discussion.
Which is great to discover that kind of these classic themes of Catholic social teaching, which Pope Leo has said is what we need to bring to the AI, really do have applicability today, right? So the dignity of work, the foundation that came out of Rerum Novarum, the Church's response to the Industrial Revolution, right? This is still today what we need to look at. Ideas like subsidiarity, that things need to be carried out at the most appropriate and most local level that they can, with support from higher levels of society. This is really important even with AI that can be used to manage people from a kind of centralized level. AI today, we need to think about how do we allow for small units, for individuals, for more local people to act freely and not be constrained. And you can do this with AI. You can have smaller AI models, AIs that are kind of more specifically designed for small groups. And so thinking about these ways in which we can actually support these principles of Catholic social teaching with technology.
It's really interesting that a lot of companies want to advertise the uses of AI as something where you can outsource smaller jobs or responsibilities to, and that leaves more room to do more meaningful actions or more enjoyable actions, when really there can be a lot of meaning in those smaller actions too, or the ways that we are in service to one another that are more difficult than maybe playing a game with somebody, but are truly showing the extent of one's love and willingness to offer sacrificial love to another person. So I think really making those human judgments of what actions to outsource and not to outsource, whether or not that is determined according to what is the easier task. That doesn't seem to be enough. It needs to be considering what is the more meaningful action that showcases the love that I want to demonstrate to that other person.
That's perfectly said, right? So these small tasks really have ways of allowing us to be in service to others, but also in service to whatever kind of practice we're doing. Like, we learn a lot through these kinds of small tasks. We learn a lot through doing things in an embodied manner that you can't just do just kind of like, oh, just give me a summary of something, or just do it and tell me that it's done. It's the embodied skill. So I remember in science, like, I learned a lot just interacting with animals as I kind of did my scientific research. If you could just, there would have been something lost to my research if I just outsourced that to kind of robotic instruments.
Now, there's a lot of practices that are meant to help form the person and help to prepare them maybe for further responsibilities, that if a person doesn't have that foundational formation to begin with, they won't be able to express that further agency later.
This is a problem that a lot of business leaders are now starting to recognize. We're starting to see, like, entry-level office work. There's concerns that those people aren't being hired because, we can just do those tasks through AI. But business leaders are starting to see if they hollow out that bottom rung of their organizations, in 10 years, there's going to be no one at the middle rung of their organization. So how do you balance those kinds of drives to kind of make everything more efficient, but the fact that, we need to have a future?
That's so true, and there's a lot of ways that technology design should consider the fact that because humans grow and learn, if we continue to outsource what seem to be more minuscule duties, it actually can prevent future leaders from being able to have a fuller knowledge of what a practice looks like and how to help care for people in all areas of the organization too. I wanted to also talk a bit about your work, Tomorrow's Troubles, which I find to be a really important book right now for the fact that it's engaging in very practical ethical questions, but also showcasing that there's spiritual dangers too in the technocratic paradigm, and that maybe we can still preserve the spiritual resources that we need to be able to combat some of those dangers. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to some of the larger project of Tomorrow's Troubles and where you think there's hope to help to respond to those spiritual questions too.
I was inspired to do Tomorrow's Troubles because of my past in genetics. So my first career was in genetics. And what I saw over the course of my career in genetics and then my move into theology was that genetics was focusing more and more on kind of predicting people's risks of disease, right? Or predicting people's possibility of having kind of heart disease, You see this with a lot of those direct-to-consumer genetics testing. You have a 20% increased risk over average of having colon cancer. And I started wondering about, what kinds of anxieties, what kinds of dangers can come with this focus on risk? But as I started investigating this question, once you start thinking about risk, you start seeing it everywhere. Right? Our financial system is basically a bunch of people trying to calculate risks and rewards. Insurance, which is really a foundation of much of our society, is about risk. Emergency management is about risk. A lot of even AI we think about is probabilistic prediction, which is very similar to risk. And then, as I was moving through the research on this idea of risk, we hit COVID, which is everyone was thinking about the risk all the time. So once you start seeing that so much of our society is based on and built on this predictive analysis of risk, you have to start wondering, what is this doing to us? And how is this different from older models of how people reason about their practical life? Because mathematical models of risk only emerged in the mid-17th century. So before then, people didn't even really think about risk in the same way. They thought about, they always had thoughts of cautions and there were common dangers, but the focus was on kind of seeking an end and trying to reach an end. Whereas now I think we're much more on how do we manage the risks that face us in life. It's less indirected. And my analysis in this was that this can be, it's brought a lot of good, right? We can confront the dangers of hurricanes. We can figure out okay, when do we have to stop in to step in to prevent diseases? So I don't want to downplay it. In the book, I say there's a real important place for risk analysis in public policy and health and these other areas. But I also think that the encouragement of this thinking about risk can be really damaging. It can cause people anxiety because they're not just focused on what good am I trying to achieve, they're focused on all the dangers that face them. They're focused on kind of not having, anticipatory regret is one term that economists use. They're worried about the fear of missing out. So I think this is causing a lot of anxiety, especially about young people who are trying to just determine their life course ahead. And the other thing is it encourages an idea of a desperate attempt to control and manage risk. We see this in medicine and genetics with people trying to get all the information about the next generation, and even in eugenic mode, trying to pick going into and doing IVF so they can pick which embryo that has the least risk. And I think that has dangers of control over others. But I think this dream that we can know the entirety of the future and control it also stands in some contrast to what Christ calls us to do in the Sermon on the Mount, which is not to worry about tomorrow, to trust in God's providence, to take proper care, take due care, but to seek the kingdom despite the risk, and frequently in face of quite large risks. And so what is the way that this focus on risks can undermine our ability to imitate and follow Christ?
I really think that book presents nicely the human responsibility to discern and to gather the information that one needs to make a truly human decision, but then at the same time to not have to worry about regretting options that have already gone because of a need to trust in the path that God is unfolding. And that's something that I really appreciated from your book, is that it's emphasizing the spiritual importance of being able to rely on the grace of God at work in one's life that can sometimes be forgotten when we want to seek full control over our paths and over the environment around us, or over relationships through mediation by technology. So I really appreciate your work in that book, very much so.
Thank you.
What do you think, looking forward, because some of the questions that book brings up are very important for people at moments of big discernment for their life, maybe even college students. But thinking more broadly, what is some advice that you have for a college like Benedictine that wants to help to transform culture for America? What are some of the advice that you would give to our students?
It always starts with encouraging, which I think Benedictine already does through its curriculum, as far as I understand it, a deep commitment to the Catholic understanding of the human person, and a deep commitment to kind of the relationship with God. And so as long as people maintain that witness is that witness is the first stance that everything can do, that anyone can do. But I think in general, as we think about moving forward with these new technologies, Catholic universities have an important place. Both on figuring out how are they going to implement these technologies and serving as a beacon for that. How are we going to train computer scientists, the people who are going to be our business leaders, as they kind of implement these new technologies and these new ways of thinking in the world? How do we train the nurses and people going into medicine to think about how do we implement these technologies in the medical system? So we both will have an example to how Catholic institutions implement themselves, but also preparing the leaders who will be the people who are figuring out, do we implement these in good ways that serve these practices, that serve the vulnerable, that serve the common good? Or are we just going to race as quickly as possible and extract as much as possible in ways that will degrade the common good?
I think that's so well said, and thank you so much for our conversation today and for visiting Benedictine College, Paul.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
We hope you enjoyed the Benedictine Dialogues, a production of Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. To catch all the latest and support our growing platform, visit media.benedictine.edu. And be sure to recommend this show to your friends and family. Help us to transform culture in America, one conversation at a time.